My name is Ricci Levy, and I am the president of the Woodhull Freedom Foundation. Oh, thank you. So tonight we have several really exciting things for you. Tonight we are going to give our 2018 Vicki Sexual Freedom Awards. And tonight we are going to enjoy Bubbles and Burlesque. And we're going to start Bubbles and Burlesque with some bubbles. Well, actually there are bubbles and then there's champagne. So there are two kinds of bubbles. I want to introduce you. Chad, am I ready to introduce? Okay. I want to introduce you to our board co-chair, Hardy Haberman, who I knew would be someplace.
So if you were here earlier, you may have heard what I was about to say, but Ricci said, I want you to say that again. So I'm going to say it again. I'm the co-chair of the Woodhull Freedom Foundation, and I want to personally welcome everybody here. This is our 9th year in Washington, around Washington, and it's a great summit. It's a great event. I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember a stand-up comic named Lenny Bruce, but undoubtedly you know of George Carlin. Both were famous for using words that were unacceptable, words that got Lenny Bruce arrested. George Carlin, on the other hand, did an entire routine based on the 7 words you were forbidden to say on television, radio, or in the media. The humor of that routine really lay in the conscious breaking of taboos in the media. The nervous laughter it produced was in part because he was unashamed to use the same speech everyone used in their daily conversations. He just did it on stage. It would seem quaint today. In the media, we can pretty much talk about anything. Or can we? Our country has a problem with language. There are certain words and topics we just cannot discuss in an adult and rational manner. The words are pretty much normal, everyday words, like a little 3-letter word. Sex. America cannot discuss sex without being couched in a joke or a sophomoric reference or as criminal activity. Sex, something almost every human being engages in at one time or another. And unless you were the product of in vitro fertilization, you were conceived and sex was undoubtedly involved. By trying to bring that topic up in this town, specifically in the Capitol building, and unless it is in regard to something illegal, it is never spoken. When politicians do talk about sex, it is either as a crude joke, locker room stories, or with a heartfelt apology for some socially unacceptable act which they were caught doing. The inability to speak about sex cripples our legislature, and it warps our country's already problematic attitudes towards it. Sex in Washington is something to be disdained, embarrassed by, or legislated against. It is a dysfunctional relationship with what can be a perfectly natural and joyous act. It is an attitude so dysfunctional that it leads to misguided laws like FOSTA and worse, a repression of natural desires. And that leads to those bathroom encounters and scandals we hear about. Sex. If there's one thing I would hope to accomplish in my life, it is bringing our country and lawmakers to the realization that if we cannot talk about sex, we can never embrace it in a healthy manner. If we can't talk about sex as adults, we will forever be stuck in a perpetual adolescence. Sex. If it is consensual between adults, it should be celebrated and not condemned. If we could talk about it rationally, we would be having more of it, and doing so in a healthy and honest way. Sex, having that conversation as adults, allows us to educate our children with a realistic, comprehensive view of the full spectrum of consensual human sexual expression. Sex. Having an adult conversation will allow us to recognize the importance of bodily autonomy and in all matters regarding sex, reproduction, and economic justice. Sex. Having an adult conversation will allow us to accept sex work as legitimate work and understand that sex workers' dignity and safety is as important as that of any other profession. Sex. We must talk about it. We must demand that our elected representatives do so as well. At this critical time in our country's history, we cannot afford to stay silent. We cannot afford to allow repression to stunt our country's maturity. We must talk about sex. We must write about sex. We must blog about sex. We must fight for sex. We must have more sex. It is a radical idea and a radical act. But these are times that call for just such radical acts. Say it with me, Americans. I am not afraid to talk about sex. I am not afraid to talk about sex. Then one day, perhaps we'll be able to talk like adults about other important four-letter words, like love, and five-letter words, like peace, and seven-letter words, like justice. Maybe one day there will be no words that can't be spoken. May it be so. Thank you.
So about sex. I don't have anything to say, just think about where your mind just went. You can share. No, not really. Let me tell you a little bit about tomorrow, even though we're just here tonight. Tomorrow will be workshops all day long. There is a Keynote Luncheon featuring one of the 2018 Vicki Sexual Freedom Award recipients, Mia Mingus. Yay, Mia. And tomorrow night is The Power of the Erotic, an event brought to you by Sister Song, our partner for the 2018 summit. So please, keep your energy up. Stay hydrated. You have a lot of work to do. And on Sunday, we close with brunch, yum food, right? And a panel, Sexual Freedom in the Age of Trump. You are not going to want to miss that panel. So, now to the serious part. One of the many perks of my work leading a human rights organization like Woodhull is that I get to meet some of the most amazing, dedicated, selfless, most giving people I could ever hope to know. Two of our 2018 Vicki Sexual Freedom Award recipients are those people. I'm going to talk to you first about Carolyn Bettinger-Lopez, definitely one of those people. I first began working with Carrie about 2011, maybe a little before then. I had heard about her work as lead counsel on the case of Jessica Lanahan. If you were with us at lunch today, you heard quite a bit about Carrie's work, and you had a wonderful glimpse into the vast scope of that work. I just want to say I have no idea what I did, but okay. All right. So back to Carrie. I think that was a sign, Carrie, an applause, a recognition of your work, right? So Carrie's passion, her practice, her teaching and advocacy all center on the human right to be free of violence. And she pays particular attention to the way that violence against women intersects with gender and race discrimination and immigrants' rights. When I asked Carrie what part of her work made her the most proud, she told me it was getting the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to hold the United States accountable for human rights violations against Jessica Lanahan, making sure that Jessica got her day in court. You will have heard this afternoon how in 1999, Jessica Lanahan's daughters were abducted by her estranged husband, and they were murdered after the Castle Rock, Colorado police repeatedly refused to enforce her domestic violence restraining order. Our courts, all the way to the Supreme Court, now think about this, found that the police had no constitutional duty to enforce a restraining order. Enter Carrie. Carrie, leading a team from the Human Rights Clinic at the University of Miami School of Law, the Human Rights Clinic at Columbia Law School, and the ACLU, and taking this case all the way to the Inter-American Commission, claiming human rights violations by the police and by the United States courts. And finally, in August of 2011, the Commission issued its landmark decision, finding the United States responsible for human rights violations suffered by Jessica Lanahan and recommending changes to our domestic law and policy. By framing domestic violence as a human rights violation, the case challenges advocates and policymakers to rethink the current approach to domestic violence in the United States and asks whether fundamental human rights are being respected, protected, and fulfilled. The decision holds the potential to influence domestic violence advocacy in the United States and more broadly to help bring human rights home to the United States. And this is just part of the work of Carrie Bettinger-Lopez. Eleanor Roosevelt challenged us by asking, where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places, close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood they live in, the school or college they attend, the factory, farm, or office where they work. Such are the places where every person seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. Without concerted citizen action to uphold them close to home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world. My friends, I give you tonight a fierce champion for human rights, a person who fights every single day for an end to domestic violence, a dedicated advocate for women's rights, my personal friend and hero, and one of our 2018 Vicki Sexual Freedom Award recipients, Dr. Carolyn Bettinger-Lopez.
As somebody mentioned, when I was being introduced at lunch, there was an Amber Alert, and now there's a fire alarm. So the heavens are perhaps saying something or, trying to get us all riled up. So here we are. So, Ricci, thank you. Thank you for that incredible introduction. And just for this incredible honor. I can't tell you what an honor it is for me to be here, for me to be challenged by everybody here, by Ricci, by the Woodhull Foundation, to really kind of think outside of my work and think about my work in terms of sexual freedom as a human right and freedom from sexual violence and gender violence as a fundamental human right, and what that means in the context of the very complex issues that all of you are addressing in this conference. We had a really interesting discussion during the keynote today about some questions about consent and how that plays into federal and state law and policy. And while those issues can get really dry, they are at the core of what you are considering and thinking about in this conference and what you go back into your everyday lives and bring back from this conference. So I want to congratulate you on the incredible work that you, Ricci, and you, the Woodhull community, have been engaged in. You are pushing the boundaries for all of us in the human rights community, in the sexual freedom community, in the LGBT community, and in many other communities to really kind of expand our horizons and think big about what it means to have fundamental human rights and how we practice those in our everyday actions and through our work as actors, as civic actors, as actors before a legal system. And so I want to thank you for inspiring us, for pushing us, and for helping us to kind of get to the next level, and for bringing this community together. Because as I said during my keynote this afternoon, it is so important in this day and age for all of us to stay strong and stay unified and be there as a community to move forward. It's more important now than perhaps ever before. Thank you for this great honor. I look forward to continuing to know you and work with you and collaborate with this incredible organization. Thank you.
It could be worse. It could be another fire alarm. Recreate the moment. So you're over here. Hands with the left. Accept with the right. Smile. This is heavy. Well, my hard work is done for the moment. Let's see what happens when Lisbeth Melendez-Rivera gets up here to speak. What treats do the gods have in store for us? I'm happy to introduce you all to Lisbeth Melendez-Rivera, a board member at the Woodhull Freedom Foundation, my friend most of the time. Lisbeth Melendez-Rivera. Can you see me? Okay. First of all, thank you for being here. I know that there's pool parties going on, a bar outside, lots of other things. So on behalf of the board of Woodhull, we are really grateful and thankful that you are with us tonight. I was tasked this year with presenting the award. It's the second time that I have this honor. I'll tell you an anecdote about the first time. Once I handed the award, we went out celebrating. This was on the early days of the summit, and we decided to play football with the award. Needless to say, the award has some really nice aged cracks in it. So we're going to try not to do that tonight. I won't tell you who the awardee was, but they are in this room. I met Mia Mingus when I was younger, skinnier, and prettier. She's always been fabulous looking, so I don't have to tell you about that. But I met this young executive director of an organization called Spark in Atlanta while we were both doing work together with another organization, one of our sponsors, the Safety International, at the time, lesbian, gay, bi, trans task force, today only known as NGLTF, the task force. And to tell you that I was in awe is actually to shortchange the kind of emotions that came out of working in the South
as a Korean trans country adoptee, doing work of reproductive justice, of disability, of transformative justice, in some of the hardest conditions I know. I do work in the South all the time, and to live there and to do the work, for those of you who do that, kudos to you. I left. I lasted about a year and a half. I was like, I can no longer play the code switch that happens in the South for me to be able to do this. So before there's lots of bail money involved, I am going to exit. So for me, to meet people like Mia, who stuck to that work and who were so committed of the work that were happening there, was truly a magnificent experience. She left Atlanta eventually and landed in the Bay. I can read you the 17-page bio I have in front of me, but she told me to spare you, so I'll try my best. But Mia is not just an activist. She's not just a great organizer. She is a writer. She's an educator. She works for disability justice and transformative justice. She is a queer, physically disabled Korean woman, as I mentioned, transracial, transnational adoptee, who happened to live also in the Caribbean, which is where we are, again, once more, king. We both went through probably one of the most disheartening years of our life in the last 11 months as we approached the anniversary of the landing, or the commemoration of the landing of Irma and Maria in the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. And if you want to know more about that, please afterwards talk to both of us. The work continues. And yes, we're standing, but barely. It's not by the help of this government. She works for community, for independency, and home for all of us. Places where sometimes we seek solace and sometimes we're denied. Our families of choice are large, are selective, and yet represent almost everybody in this room when we walked into our homes. And I know because I've spent time, and I consider Mia to be part of my chosen extended family. Currently, Mia is a 2016 Just Beginnings Collaborative Fellow, which is funded by the Living Bridges Project, an anonymous story collecting project documenting collective responses to child sexual abuse. Mia is a founder and a core member of the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective, a local collective working to build and support transformative justice responses to child sexual abuse that do not rely on the state. That means no police, no prisons, and no criminal legal system, where we end up being exploited once again. She believes in prison abolition and urges all activists and organizers to critically and creatively think beyond the nonprofit industrial complex. Her writings can be found in her blog, Living Evidence, as well as Makeshift, Dear Sister, Letter from Survivors of Sexual Violence, Octavia Brude's Sci-Fi for Social Movements, and others. Again, extensive writing, as she is that creative. In 2013, along with the 14 other activists, Mia was recognized by the White House as an Asian Pacific Islander Woman Champion of Change in observance of Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month, which is in May for those of you who might not know where it's located in the calendar. Mia was a 2005 New Voices Fellow, was named one of the Advocates 40 Under 40 in 2010, and one of the 30 most influential Asian Americans under 30 in 2009 by Angry Asian Men's, one of Campus Pride's top 25 LGBTQ favorite speakers for the 2009, 10, 11 hot list, and was listed in Go Magazine's 2013 100 Women We Love, an honor that we share that year, for which I'm incredibly proud. I can't give you much more information on Mia, but I'll leave you with this. I cannot think of anybody who deserves this award more than you. To join our collective awardees and to honor us with not just your presence, but your wisdom and your humility. Please step up and accept your Vicki Freedom Award.
Oh my goodness, no fire alarm, right? We're okay? How are you all doing? Thank you so much for honoring me. Thank you, Lizbeth. Thank you, Ricci. Thank you, Woodhull. This is very wonderful. Also because it's been about 15 years since I've been back in the reproductive justice movement, and so it's really lovely to be back here with you all, and also in these trying times. But it is wonderful to be back here. And I want to say, too, that, you know, when I was coming up in the reproductive justice movement, that was at a time before reproductive justice was even really a widespread term. We were still trying to educate people on what that meant. We were trying to challenge more people to use it. And as somebody who was also a young, queer, disabled woman of color, adoptee, transracial, transnational adoptee, I also was pushing the disability I guess, the reproductive justice movement to recognize disability and ableism more. And at the time, there was no mention of ableism. And I would go to so many different types of social justice events, reproductive justice and beyond, and never hear people talk about disability, never hear them talk about ableism. And now, even though I know we still have a very long way to go, definitely. We are nowhere near where we want to be, and I hear people naming ableism now. I see more disabled people at events. I see conferences putting accessibility information in their pamphlets and on their websites, and that never used to happen. And I remember sitting in rooms as people would talk about statistics about young women of color, LGBT folks, which we still have a long way to go on that too. And I would raise my hand and say, well, what about disabled people? What about disabled people? Why don't we have more information when we talk about the right to parent with dignity, disabled people, how can we not talk about disabled people? How can we not talk about bodies without talking about disability? This is ridiculous. And I know we still have a long way to go, but I also feel very proud of a lot of that work that I know that I was a part of helping to forward and helping to create an environment where people were starting to connect why disability and ableism were so crucial for us to understand when we talk about reproductive justice, when we talk about sexual freedom, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, a lot of my work has been around intersectionality, and I think that that was because I came up at a time where the reproductive rights movement was really being pushed around intersectionality. They were not there yet. They were nowhere near where they are now, and we still have a long way to go as well. And I was a young, queer, disabled woman of color in the Deep South, in the Bible Belt, doing reproductive justice work. And I remember that is one of the ways that I came to transformative justice work, was that as I was working with my community, who was largely queer and trans people of color who were living and surviving and loving in the South, I remember thinking, you know, a lot of these folks are not seeking, the reason why they're not seeking reproductive health services is not because they don't have a state-issued ID. It's not because people aren't queer competent or trans competent. It's not because they can't find childcare, et cetera, et cetera. It's because most of them were survivors of sexual violence of some kind. And they did not do any type of reproductive health services at all. And I think that that was a light bulb moment for me to figure out, how do we build alternatives, actually, that we can keep pushing back against these systems, these dangerous systems? That's very important. And we also have to build alternatives for people who fall through the cracks. So thank you all so much for having me here tonight and for recognizing my work. I feel like in many ways I have been working on the margins of the margins. So it's just really exciting anytime folks are like, yes, that is important work. Thank you all.
I love candids, don't you? I feel like I'm in a photo shoot. I know. I've never been in a photo shoot. Thank you. Okay. Please join me once once again in recognizing our 2018 Vicki Sexual Freedom Award recipients. And there is champagne coming in from both sides of the room.